There's a particular kind of evening that exists in apartment hallways. Quieter than the street outside, warmer than the lobby below, lit by the soft yellow glow of overhead fixtures that have seen decades of comings and goings and have never once commented on any of them. It was in that kind of hallway, on the third floor of a modest brick building on Larkspur Avenue, that Eleanor Bishop stood outside her own apartment door on a Tuesday evening in early March, holding a casserole dish covered in foil, her gray cardigan slung over one arm, having just locked herself out for the second time that week. She was 41 years old, recently moved into apartment 306 after a divorce that had been, in her own private accounting, more relieving than devastating, though she had not yet found the words to explain that distinction to her well-meaning sister, who still called twice a week to check on her as though she were recovering from something tragic rather than simply starting over. She had just discovered, patting down her cardigan pockets with growing alarm, that her keys were sitting on her kitchen counter on the wrong side of a door she had absent-mindedly pulled shut behind her. She was standing there, mid-sigh, weighing whether to call the building superintendent or simply sit on the floor and wait for inspiration when a door across the hall, apartment 304, opened and a small girl in a pink sweater stepped out into the hallway. The girl's name was Penny Holloway. She was 6 years old, with long brown hair held back from her face by a small pink bow, and the particular unself-conscious directness that some children carry before the world has taught them to filter their observations before speaking them aloud. She looked at Eleanor for a moment, at the casserole dish, at the keys that were clearly not in evidence anywhere on her person, at the particular flustered expression of an adult who has just realized she has made a small but inconvenient mistake, and walked over without hesitation. "Are you locked out?" Penny asked. Eleanor looked down, startled out of her private frustration. "I am, actually," she said. "How did you guess?" "You keep patting your pockets," Penny said. "That's what my dad does when he loses his phone. He pats his pockets like the phone is going to magically be there if he checks enough times." Eleanor laughed a real laugh, surprised out of her, the first one a long Tuesday. "That is exactly what I'm doing," she admitted. "I'm Eleanor. I just moved in across the hall. Apartment 306. "I'm Penny," the girl said. "I live here with my dad. My mom doesn't live here. She lives in Denver, but that's a different story." It was the kind of opening exchange that might have ended there, pleasantly, briefly, the way most hallway conversations between neighbors do. A few friendly words exchanged before both parties continue on with their respective evenings. But Penny, it turned out, was not quite finished. She looked at the foil-covered dish in Eleanor's hands with open curiosity. "What's that?" "A casserole," Eleanor said. "I made too much. I was actually going to ask if your dad might want some, since I haven't met him properly yet. But it seems I've locked myself out before I could even knock on your door." Penny's face brightened considerably. "You should give it to him," she said with sudden and surprising urgency. "He forgets to eat when he's worried. He's been worried a lot lately." Eleanor paused, the casual warmth of the moment shifting into something quieter and more careful. "Is he worried about something in particular?" she asked gently, the way an adult asks a child a question they suspect might matter more than the child fully realizes. Penny nodded, her small face suddenly more serious. "His work thing," she said. "He doesn't tell me exactly what because he says I'm 6 and shouldn't have to worry about grown-up stuff. But I hear him on the phone sometimes, late, after he thinks I'm asleep. He uses his quiet, careful voice. That's the voice he uses when something's bad, but he doesn't want to scare me." She said all of this with a particular matter-of-fact honesty children bring to observations they've made without fully understanding the weight of what they're describing, simply reporting what she had noticed, the way she might report that it had rained that morning, or that her favorite cereal was running low. "And he forgets dinner?" Eleanor asked softly. "Sometimes I have to remind him," Penny said. "Like, 'Dad, did you eat?' And he says, 'In a minute, pickle.' But then a minute turns into a really long time. And sometimes it doesn't happen at all until really late." and I can tell he's just saying it to make me stop asking. Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. Not quite sadness, though sadness was certainly part of it, but something closer to recognition. She knew, with the particular clarity of someone who had recently lived through her own difficult stretch, exactly what it looked like when a person's worry quietly crowded out the ordinary maintenance of their own body. The skipped meals, the distracted exhaustion, the way a person could go through an entire day forgetting to do the basic things that kept them functioning simply because their mind had no spare room left for anything but the worry itself. "What's his name?" Eleanor asked. "Your dad." "Russell," Penny said. "Russell Holloway. He's a really good dad. He's just having a hard month." "I believe you," Eleanor said. "He sounds like a wonderful father. Actually, if his 6-year-old is standing in a hallway trying to make sure he gets dinner." Penny considered this with visible satisfaction, as though Eleanor had correctly identified an important fact that deserved acknowledgement. "I try to take care of him," she said simply. "Mom says that's not really my job, that grown-ups are supposed to take care of kids, not the other way around. But I don't mind. He takes care of me about everything else. This is just one small thing I could do back." It was at this exact moment that the door to apartment 304 opened further, and a man stepped into the hallway, tall, dark-haired, wearing a worn gray Henley, his expression carrying the particular tired alertness of someone checking on a child who has wandered slightly further than expected. "Penny, who are—" he started, and then stopped, taking in the scene. His daughter, standing in the hallway in earnest conversation with a woman holding a casserole dish, clearly mid-conversation about something that had moved well beyond a simple introduction. "This is Eleanor," Penny announced. "She lives in 306. She's locked out, and she has a casserole, and I told her you forget to eat when you're worried." Russell Holloway's face went through several rapid transitions. Confusion, then a flicker of something like embarrassment, then finally a kind of resigned, tired affection for his daughter's complete inability to keep anything to herself. "Penny," he said quietly, "you don't need to tell our new neighbor about that." "Why not?" Penny asked, genuinely puzzled. "It's true." Eleanor watched this exchange with a particular tenderness, recognizing immediately the careful, protective instinct in Russell's response. The instinct of a parent trying to manage how much of their own private struggle becomes visible to the outside world, even as their child, with the unfiltered honesty only children possess, simply says the true thing because it is true. "I'm sorry," Russell said, turning to Eleanor, color rising slightly in his face. "She doesn't have much of a filter. I promise I do, in fact, eat dinner. Mostly." "Mostly," Penny repeated, with the particular satisfaction of a child whose point has just been confirmed by the very person trying to downplay it. Eleanor smiled gently. "I'm not here to judge anyone's eating habits," she said. "I'm the woman who locked herself out of her own apartment holding a casserole I made far too much of. I was actually hoping to introduce myself properly and ask if you'd like some, since cooking for one means I always end up with 3 days of leftovers I can't finish alone." Russell looked at the dish, then at his daughter, then back at Eleanor, something in his tired face softening. "That's very kind," he said. "You really don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Eleanor said. "I like to, though. It's nice to have a reason to actually meet a neighbor, instead of just nodding at each other in the elevator." What happened over the following weeks unfolded slowly, the way real neighborly kindness tends to, not through any single dramatic gesture, but through small, accumulating acts of attention. Eleanor learned in pieces over the casserole that evening and the conversations that followed that Russell worked as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm that had, 3 months earlier, lost its largest client, triggering a round of layoffs that Russell had so far survived but worried, with good reason, might not be finished. He was a single father. Penny's mother had moved to Denver for a job opportunity 2 years earlier, and custody had settled, amicably enough, into Russell having Penny full-time during the school year. He was, by every indication Eleanor gathered. A devoted and exhausted man trying to hold together more than any one person should reasonably have to hold alone. Eleanor began, without much fanfare, simply cooking a little more than she needed most evenings. Not as charity, she was careful to frame it, but as practical neighborliness, the kind that exists between people who happen to live across a hallway from each other and have decided, mutually, that sharing a meal now and then is simply easier and more pleasant than cooking alone every single night. Russell, for his part, began reciprocating in small ways, fixing a sticking cabinet hinge in Eleanor's kitchen, walking her trash down to the bins on nights when the elevator was slow and she was tired, the easy, unspoken give and take that grows between people who have decided, without much formal discussion, that they're looking out for each other now. Penny remained, throughout all of this, the quiet architect of the entire arrangement, though she would have been startled to hear herself described that way, since she understood herself simply to be a 6-year-old who liked Eleanor's casseroles, and liked having dinner with 3 people instead of 2 most nights, rather than someone who had, with a single unfiltered hallway observation, opened a door that 2 careful, exhausted adults might otherwise have taken months to open on their own. "You started all this, Eleanor told her once. Several weeks later, while the 3 of them sat at Russell's small kitchen table over a shepherd's pie Eleanor had brought over. "Started what?" Penny asked, genuinely puzzled, halfway through a forkful of mashed potato. "This," Eleanor said, gesturing at the table at Russell, at the warm, ordinary scene of 3 people sharing a Tuesday dinner. "If you hadn't told me your dad forgets to eat when he's worried, I might never have actually knocked on your door." Penny considered this seriously, the way she considered most things. "I just didn't want him to be hungry," she said simply, "and lonely. I figured those things go together." Russell, across the table, looked at his daughter with an expression that Eleanor would remember for a long time afterward. Not just love, though it was certainly that, but a particular kind of awe. The awe a parent feels when their child reveals, suddenly and without warning, a wisdom that seems too large for the small body carrying it. "They do go together," he said quietly. "You're right about that, Pickle." Russell's work situation did not resolve quickly or dramatically. The layoffs he had feared eventually arrived in a second round. 3 months after Eleanor's first casserole, and Russell found himself, for a difficult stretch of nearly 2 months between jobs, navigating the particular anxious math of unemployment with a 6-year-old depending on him. But he did not navigate it alone. Eleanor remained a steady, practical presence throughout, not solving his problems for him, which she was careful never to attempt, but simply ensuring, through ordinary acts of shared meals and shared evenings, that he did not have to carry the weight of that stretch in complete isolation. She listened when he needed to talk through the worry. She stayed quiet when he needed simply to sit with someone nearby without discussing anything at all. She made sure, on the hardest evenings, that dinner happened for Penny's sake as much as his own, though by then it had become genuinely, mutually, for everyone's sake. Russell found a new position eventually, at a smaller firm with steadier footing and the particular tightness that had lived in his shoulders for the better part of half a year began slowly to ease. Eleanor and Russell's relationship deepened in the months that followed into something neither of them had been looking for when a casserole dish and a locked door had first brought them into the same hallway conversation. It grew slowly, carefully, the way good things often do. When 2 people have already been burned once by moving too quickly, built not on grand romantic gestures, but on the steady accumulation of shared dinners, shared worries, and the particular trust that develops between 2 adults who have watched each other patiently through a difficult season. Penny, for her part, took enormous and entirely unembarrassed credit for the entire arrangement for years afterward, reminding both of them regularly that none of it would have happened if she hadn't told a stranger in the hallway that her dad forgets to eat. "Well, he's worried. I'm basically responsible for this whole family." she announced once at the dinner table several years later, when the arrangement had become permanent enough that nobody in the apartment bothered calling it anything other than home. "You absolutely are," Eleanor agreed without argument. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Asterisk, perhaps that is the gentle truth tucked inside a story like this one. That children often see what worried adults try carefully to hide, and that their honesty, offered without filter or hesitation, can open doors that careful adult restraint might never have opened on its own. A casserole, a locked door, and one small girl's simple observation were enough to begin something neither adult had been looking for. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is listen closely when a child tells us plainly what someone nearby actually needs. Asterisk,